program this evening with Sheikh Abdul. He comes from Dallas, Texas, and not to cause any delays, we're going to be continuing the topic that the Sheikh was talking about during the khutbah today with the last days of the Prophet ﷺ, a program called Farewell.
Okay, Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So alhamdulillah, I wanted to welcome everyone to tonight's program called Farewell, the final days of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And inshallah, what we're going to be doing here tonight is talking about two main events from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The first of them, actually, what we're going to be talking about is Hajjatul Wida. And we're going to be talking about the Hajj the Prophet ﷺ performed, the farewell pilgrimage of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Not so much in the vein of it being like a class on how to do Hajj, but more so discussing it from the point of view of, since the Hajj was the last major journey of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and the fact that the Prophet ﷺ performed the Hajj about 3 months before passing away, the Prophet ﷺ, and it was also the singular largest gathering of Muslims in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ availed that opportunity to leave some very fundamentally significant and important advice and instructions for the Muslims to follow and to implement going forward. And so it's very important for us to be cognizant and to be aware that what was the final advice of the Prophet ﷺ to us as an ummah, what was the vision of the Prophet ﷺ going forward for the ummah, and so that's the first thing that we're going to be talking about. The second thing that we're going to be discussing here tonight, and we'll do that in the second portion of the class, is inshallah what we'll be talking about is the actual departure, the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, and the death of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wafatun Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the way that we're going to be talking about his passing is, again, not so much, just simply mentioning the fact that he passed away or when he passed away. Of course, we'll touch on those things, but the 1 week before the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ used that opportunity to once again interact with a lot of his companions, his family members, and the Prophet ﷺ also utilized that opportunity to once again give some very, very important advice and give some very fundamental instructions about what to do going forward. And so inshallah we'll also be talking about and observing what did the Prophet ﷺ say, what did he do during that final week of his life, and how he prepared himself and he prepared the ummah for his ultimate and eventual departure. Before we get started though, very quickly I wanted to start with a bit of I wanted to start with a little bit of an introduction. First and foremost is, just to help understand and explain why we're talking about this particular topic. There are so many beneficial things that we could be talking about, and this is definitely one of them. I think everyone is cognizant of that, everyone's here, but just to still better explain exactly why we're talking about this. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to explain some of the thoughts behind this particular topic and this discussion. First and foremost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Laqad in the Arabic language is for emphasis, للتوكيد, most definitely. Kana, لقد كان لكم, kana يفيد الاستمرار. It basically means there has always been, is, and will always be. Al-istimrar, continuity. There always has been, will always be, there has always been, is, and will always be. Continuity, continuously. Lakum, the word lakum, kum, dhamir, للجمع ضمير الجمع ضمير للمجموع. The word kum means all of you, and it doesn't exclude anyone. So far what has Allah said? Allah has said there's no doubt about the fact that there always has been, is, and will always be for all of you. All of you. Right? Young and old, men and women, Arab and non-Arab, whether you lived 1400 years ago, 800 years ago, or you live today, for every single person. Fi Rasulillah. The word fi in the Arabic language, معناه إدخال الشيء في الشيء, which means, the word fi means for something to be completely contained within something. So if I say that Zaydun fil masjid, Zayd is in the masjid, that doesn't mean he's next door. It doesn't mean he's down the street. It means he's inside the masjid. So fi Rasulillah, completely contained within the Prophet ﷺ. So far what has Allah said? Allah has said, there's no doubt, there always has been, is, and will always be, for all of you, doesn't matter who you are, young and old, as I said before, man or woman, Arab or non-Arab, whether you lived back then or you live now, completely contained within the Prophet ﷺ. What are you going to find? Uswatun hasana. Uswatun hasana. The word uswa is translated in a number of ways by different commentators on the Quran. The best translation that I can come up with, after doing a lot of research and a lot of thinking on this particular word, is a word that we are familiar with in the English language, and that is role model. I would translate the word uswa as a role model, someone you look up to. Hasana means the best. So Allah is saying in the Quran, which means it's undeniable, irrefutable, that there no doubt, there has always been, is, and will always be completely found within the Prophet ﷺ for everyone, the best role model. That's Allah saying that. And so what we understand from that is that if we want to know, if we mean to figure out what's the best way to live our lives, what's the best way to handle things, what's the best way to do anything that we deal with in life, personally, familially, professionally, socially, culturally, it is found, it is the example of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the role model, right? And so that's why, and this is just one example, one kind of reason that Allah gives us, along with so many others, why studying and knowing the life of the Prophet ﷺ is absolutely necessary for every Muslim, for every believer. A person's Islam is incomplete without knowing the Prophet ﷺ. Because you don't know otherwise, if you don't have the life of the Prophet ﷺ in front of you, his example before you, you don't understand, you don't know how you're supposed to take this theory of being good and apply it to real life. But when we look at the Prophet ﷺ, we see exactly how that works. And so studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ is very, very important. And one of the things that we need a lot of more contribution in regards to today. There needs to be a lot more contributing to the study of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Number one. Now that being said, studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ is very important. I don't think anybody really denies that. And that study of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, there's kind of a science, an area of study dedicated to it in Islamic studies that is called As-Siratun Nabawiyya, the prophetic biography, the Sirah for short. All right? So that's why there's always been, from the very beginning, there's always been an emphasis on the study of the Sirah. Now that being said, today, because obviously the life of the Prophet ﷺ is like a remarkable, it's a remarkable treasure, right? It's a remarkable resource that you can dive so deeply into, right? Just to give you an example, Books, lectures, discussions have been presented on the life of the Prophet ﷺ pretty much from the moment he passed away. Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, who was a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, he said that after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, we realized that our children were never going to know the Prophet ﷺ, we're never going to see him the way that we saw him. So we started, كُنَّا نُعَلِّمُ أَوْلَادَنَا مَغَازِيَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم كَمَا كُنَّا نُعَلِّمُهُمْ السُّورَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. We started teaching our children the seerah like we would teach them chapters of the Quran. And so pretty much it started from day one. And it's such a deep resource. I'll give you the example of one. There's a work on the life of the Prophet ﷺ called Subul al-Huda wa Rashad by an Imam, a scholar by the name of As-Salihi from the 8th century. Subul al-Huda wa Rashad. He wrote 11 volumes. Each volume is about 600 pages. So you can do the math. Right? He wrote over 6,000 pages just discussing the life of the Prophet ﷺ. That's just one example of one work. And so there's so much to go into, right? I'll share some resources with you towards the end of our program, but even the resource that we developed at Qalab for people to be able to learn the life of the Prophet ﷺ very practically, we have a podcast, kind of a lecture series that one can follow along. We're actually, this coming week, this coming Tuesday, we're going to be having the last session of that series. Started about 8 years ago, and it has, I think it'll end up being about 194 sessions, and each session is about an hour long. So 194 hours discussing the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and I still feel like we're just scratching the surface. So there's so much there. So obviously we can't discuss his whole life here in one evening. So I thought it would be best, I've always been a big believer in quality over quantity, that rather than just doing like a speed run through of his life, we'll take one particular moment and then we'll really dive deep into it and see what we can learn from it. So today we'll be discussing the last couple of months of his life. We'll talk about Hajj, which happened a little over 3 months before he passed away, that 1 week where he performed the Hajj, and then we'll talk about the week before he passed away. But why talk about that particular moment? Why are we discussing this moment? It seems like that's a tough moment to talk about. It's kind of a sad thing to talk about, right? Why not talk about one of the victories? Why not talk about one of the other moments? Why discuss his departure? Number one is because, as I mentioned before, the Prophet ﷺ, he saved a lot of the very important advice that he had for his ummah for the end days, towards the end of his life. That's where he imparted a lot of the very important advice he had for the ummah. Number two is that the Prophet ﷺ, because he was departing, he shared his vision for the ummah. What I expect you to do. And so it's very unique, the advice that he shared here. And number three, and this kind of goes back to the first point that I was making, a part of our deen and our religion is to love the Prophet ﷺ. Now you can't love someone until you know them. And you can't know them unless, you can't love someone until you're familiar with them. You can't be familiar with them until you either interact with them or educate yourself about them. And when you discuss the departure of the Prophet ﷺ, it will move you. It will move you. It will make you feel something. All right? The kids say it will hit you in the feels, right? So, and there's something really profound about that. I was sharing this kind of like moment with Brother Tariq earlier today. We do a program every year in Dallas, part of our, again, kind of our whole gambit of education on the seerah. So we have a program, an intensive, where people come, they stay for 10 days, they live. It's an immersive program where we study the life of the Prophet ﷺ. 10 days every year in the winter break in Dallas. It's called the Seerah Intensive. So we've been doing this for about 4 or 5 years. We have about 150 people. They come from all over the place. And we spend 10 days together, morning, afternoon, evening, studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ. I remember it was maybe the second year we were having this program, and there was a young man, who was at the program, And when you've been teaching long enough, you can kind of like look at, the classroom or the audience, and you can kind of pick up on certain things. You get good at kind of reading people's, body language, if you will. And this young man seemed very disinterested, just really not very happy to be there. And at some point, he eventually, I no longer had to read the body language because he was just literally laying on the floor sleeping in a corner. So just completely disinterested and disconnected. And I didn't necessarily, have anything against him, but I didn't want him to be wasting his time. It seemed like maybe his parents had kind of, just put him on a plane and just sent him, go. All right, let them make you Muslim. All right. So I felt bad. I wanted this young man to have a good time and, to be able to connect. So one of our staff members, one of the TAs, the teaching assistants, one of my students, I told him, I said, you see that young brother? Can you kind of talk to him, get to know him, kind of, befriend him, and try to make this experience a little bit more pleasant and beneficial for him. So he spoke to him, spent time with him, kind of got him a little bit more interested and keen. He ultimately started paying a little bit more attention, sitting in class. I saw him become more and more engaged. But nevertheless, it was kind of on and off. The last day of the class, when we were covering the portion that we're going to be talking about tonight, the passing of the Prophet ﷺ. As I was teaching the class, kind of, scanning the room, I saw the young man, and he was in tears. He was crying. And I made it a point afterwards to go to him and to ask him, said, everything okay? What's going on? I saw that you were very emotional. Do you mind sharing? What were you thinking? Like, what was going on inside? And he shared with me, he said that while I was sitting there listening, and kind of like it was hitting me about the Prophet ﷺ passing away, it made me sad. And I felt like I miss him. I miss him. It was so fascinating. That 9 days ago, there was this young man who had like zero interest about anything we were doing. And 9 days later, he was actually sitting there in tears because he said he misses the Prophet ﷺ. And that's what it really made me realize that learning about the Prophet ﷺ, and particularly talking about the end of his life, can be something very powerful that can move a person to really feel that connection with the Prophet ﷺ. All right? So inshallah, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into this. Inshallah, what we'll do is we'll kind of split the program into two portions. We'll have one portion right now where we'll talk about Hajjatul Wida. Not only we'll talk about first and foremost the Prophet ﷺ going for the Hajj, and then we'll also talk about his khutbah, the advice that he gave during that farewell sermon. And then after Salat al-Isha, we'll talk about the last week of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and ultimately the passing and the departure of the Prophet ﷺ. So the first thing that we're going to start off by talking about is Hajjatul Wida. Now, as I mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, rather I should clarify, he was 63 years old when he passed away. The Prophet ﷺ spent the first 40 years of his life, that is the era pre-prophethood, before he received revelation. And the Prophet ﷺ spent those 40 years in Mecca. Once he received revelation, he lived for another 23 years. The first 13 years of prophethood, he lived in Mecca, and then he migrated to the city of Medina, and he spent the last 10 years of his life where his residence was the city of Medina. He traveled a lot during the Medinan period, the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of Khaybar, the Battle of Tabuk, so many different moments he traveled for the Hajj, for Hudaybiyah, for an Umrah. He traveled quite a bit. Nevertheless, though, his home was Medina during the last 10 years. So, at the end of the 10th year of Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ, the year before, 2 years before that, the conquest of Mecca had happened, what I spoke about in the khutbah earlier today. Mecca came into Islam. And so all the idols were removed from the Haram, from the Kaaba, and the worship of Allah was restored at the Kaaba. The following year, in the 9th year, the Prophet ﷺ sent Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu and Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu, along with 200 companions, to go and perform a Hajj. And this was almost kind of like the test Hajj, the rehearsal Hajj. Go through the mechanics of Hajj, make sure everything is set up, or set everything up as you were going through the procedure of Hajj, in preparation of the grand Hajj, the great Hajj, Al-Hajj al-Akbar. What made it so great and so grand? The Prophet ﷺ was going to be doing Hajj. So that, in the 10th year now, in Ramadan, this was the last Ramadan of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ announced that I will indeed be going for Hajj, and anyone who wants to join us can join us. And so about a week, so on the 25th of Dhul Qa'dah, Hajj, the day of Hajj, the main day of Hajj is the 9th of Dhul Hijjah. So those 9 days plus another 5 days of Dhul Qa'dah. So about 2 weeks before the day of Hajj, the Prophet ﷺ said, we're going to be leaving Medina. And he announced it. Now people started traveling from far and wide to Mecca. Some people were directly traveling to Mecca. Anyone who lived around Medina, and anyone who lived in Medina, and anyone who lived north of Medina, they started arriving to Medina. And people started gathering there from days before. Then finally on the 25th of Dhul Qa'dah, 30,000 people departed from Medina. The Prophet ﷺ's Hajj group was 30,000 people. So 30,000 people, they depart from Medina. Right outside of Medina, not too far outside of Medina, is a place called Dhul Hulayfa. It's where they put the ihram on from the miqat. For the people of Medina, it's where you make the intention for the Hajj. And they stopped there, they put on the ihram, and now they were going to be proceeding towards the Hajj. I wanted to mention a couple of interesting things that kind of shows you the character of the Prophet ﷺ, and even such a glorious moment in his life. When they were departing from there, they had made some preparations, and some people had made arrangements for the Prophet ﷺ. So one of the arrangements that they made was that the camel of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ was, at the end of the day, 62 years old at the time, and he's the messenger of God. So out of respect for him and for his comfort, instead of riding a camel, they had this thing that they would build. It was almost kind of like a couch. And they would build it, and they would tie it, strap it onto the back of the camel. So that instead of having to ride the camel, you could kind of sit back on this couch, right? And then you could go on that. So they used to build this for like VIPs and things like that. So they had built one of these things on a camel for the Prophet ﷺ. When he put on his ihram on and he came out and he saw this, he said, "What is this?" They said, "We built it for you, O Messenger of God." He said, "No." And he himself undid the rope and he said, "Take it down." Then he saw that a man had like a sheet, a shawl, like this, just a sheet. He said, "How much did you buy this for?" He said, 10 dirhams, like $10. So the Prophet ﷺ took 10 dirhams, he gave it to him. He said, "Take this and give me the sheet." They gave the sheet to the Prophet ﷺ, and he put it on the back of the animal, and he said, "There we go, this is sufficient, this is all I need." Then he saw that the camel that he was riding, they had another camel behind that camel tied to the first one. So 2 camels tied together. This was called a zamila. He said that, "Why do you have a second camel tied to the first one?" They said, "It's your zamila." The zamila meant it's trunk space. So you ride on one camel, all your luggage, because again, VIP people, big people, they'd have like a lot of luggage, a lot of stuff. So they wouldn't want to crowd themselves on the camel they were riding, right? It's kind of like holding your bag in your lap. So instead of that, you can check it in there. All right, that'll carry your luggage for you. The Prophet ﷺ said, "I don't have any luggage. I travel light, I travel simple. That's an animal that somebody else can use as transportation. I'm not going to waste it. And he himself, with his own hands, he undid the rope and he said, give it to somebody to use. And then when he got on his camel and he started riding, he raised his hands up. And the Jabir radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in the long narration of Hajjatul Wida, he says the Prophet ﷺ said a dua, supplication. He said, Allahumma hajjatun, la riya'a fiha wa la sum'a. He said, oh Allah, allow me to do a hajj in which there is no showing off and no boastfulness, no arrogance. This is not a victory lap. This is not a victory lap. All right? Rather, this is an expression of humility and obedience and worship before Allah. I want a humble hajj that is accepted. Now they started traveling, and as they were traveling along, Jibreel alayhi salam came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he said, "Mur ashabaka falyarfa'u aswatahum bitalbiya." He said, "Tell your companions to say the talbiya, labbaik Allahumma labbaik, very loudly. فَإِنَّهَا شِعَارُ الْحَجِّ, because that is the dhikr of Hajj." And so the Prophet ﷺ told the companions, and now you had 30,000 people reciting the talbiya at the top of their voices, marching through the desert. And it was a glorious scene. They arrived there it took about a week to make that journey because of all the number of the crowd. The caravan was so huge. They arrived there in Mecca on the 2nd or the 3rd of the Hijjah, about 6 days before Hajj starts. And they ended up doing their Umrah. After doing their Umrah, they spent a few days. The Prophet ﷺ camped out on the outskirts of the city of Mecca. And they stayed there for about 4 or 5 days. People were coming. The Prophet ﷺ was giving them instruction, do Umrah, then stay for a few days, however many days. Finally, the moment came to perform the Hajj on the 8th of the Hijjah. So they went out to the place of Mina. And again, as we know, the procedure of Hajj, which is not my objective here today, to talk about the technicalities of Hajj. They spent the day at Mina, the 8th of the Hijjah. Then the 9th of the Hijjah, which we know as Yawm Arafah, they basically went to the place of Arafat, and that is the main day of Hajj. People go to the place of Arafat, and they have a khutbah, a sermon there. They pray their Dhuhr and their Asr. And then after praying their Asr, combined with Dhuhr, then everyone makes dua all the way till the setting of the sun. And so this is the main, Al-Hajj Arafah, this is the main moment of Hajj. And this is that moment where the Prophet ﷺ, it was so powerful. So that is where the Prophet ﷺ delivered the very famous khutbah of Hajjatul Wida, the sermon of the farewell pilgrimage. I'm going to come back to the sermon in just a moment. I'd like to kind of conclude with that. Before I do that, what I wanted to talk about was just a couple of other, I feel, very beneficial things where the Prophet ﷺ was communicating how important and significant this moment was. First of all, the dua at the day of Arafah. The Prophet ﷺ, Usama ibn Zayd, Jabir bin Abdullah, they all say that the Prophet ﷺ, after performing the Dhuhr and Asr, he went outside under the sun. And he stood and raised his hands up and he started making dua. And he was out there for a couple of hours. And then when he got tired, he told Usama, bring my camel to me. And then he sat on his camel outside still, under the sun, with his hands up and continued making dua. And he mentions that the Prophet ﷺ was so dialed in and focused on making dua that the Prophet ﷺ, he had both hands up and he was praying, he was supplicating, making dua. And the rope of his camel was on the back of the camel. When the rope fell off, kind of slid off, the camel kind of felt the rope move, so it started to shift. The Prophet ﷺ was making dua. He reached down with one hand and grabbed the rope of the camel, but the whole time, while he grabbed the rope of the camel, he kept his other hand up and continued making dua. And Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma says that towards the end of the evening, which is the main now opportunity to make the dua, right before the Maghrib, the setting of the sun, the Prophet ﷺ specifically made dua that, oh Allah, please forgive the sins of my ummah. please forgive the sins of my ummah. And he says, وَأَلَحَّ فِي الدُّعَاءِ فِي دُعَائِهِ. He started really insisting, oh Allah, please forgive them, please forgive them, please forgive them. And Abdullah ibn Abbas said that he was praying for the ummah, and he started looking stressed out, kept saying it, moving his arms, like insisting, please forgive them, please forgive them. And no, he wasn't getting a response, and he kept insisting. And he started to look really stressed out. And then he says, right before the setting of the sun, he said, I looked at the Prophet ﷺ, I've been watching him this whole time, and I looked at him, and he started to smile. He started to smile, like his face was just glowing. And he said, I went to him and I said, why do you smile, O Messenger of Allah? You look stressed out, now you're smiling. He said, because Jibreel alayhi salam came to me and he told me that Allah has accepted your dua, that Allah will forgive your ummah. That was what he was hoping for. That was what he would set out to accomplish that day. That's what he wanted to achieve on that day. The Prophet ﷺ, he, on that particular day, after giving the khutbah and then making this dua, the Prophet ﷺ then continued the rituals of the Hajj. They go to Muzdalifah. Then after Muzdalifah, they come back to Mina, where they go to throw the stones at the big pillar, Jamratul Aqaba. And the Prophet ﷺ said something. Because the morning of the 10th, there's a lot of technical procedures. Right? You have to go back to Mina, you have to throw the pebbles, then you have to go sacrifice the animals, shave the head, go to Mecca, make a tawaf, do a sa'i, come back to Mina. A lot of technicalities there, that day of the 10th. And the Prophet ﷺ, the morning of the 10th, he gathered the companions together and he said something. He said, خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ خُذُوا مِنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ فَلَعَلِّي لَا أَحُجُّ بَعْدَ عَمِّي هَذَا. He said, learn from me very carefully on how to do the Hajj. Because he said, it's very likely I will not be doing Hajj again after this year. That really shook people. So they performed the rest of the rites of the Hajj. And then specifically, what I wanted to mention was that the Prophet ﷺ, he gathered the Sahaba together on the 11th. The 11th and 12th, and then they departed on the 13th. The 11th and 12th, he stayed in Mina, as the Hujjaj do. On the 11th, he gathered all the companions together and he gave them a lecture on the day of the 11th. And in that khutbah, in that lecture, the khutbah, he said to them, he said, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ قَدْ يَئِسَ أَن يُعْبَدَ فِي أَرْضِكُمْ هَذِهِ. He said, look, we have established Tawheed, the oneness of God and the worship of one God here. We have re-established that here, the legacy of Abraham. He said, Shaitan has given up hope of ever making people worship idols here ever again. That's not going to happen. People are never going to worship idols here in Mecca ever again. Those days are gone. Okay? Lakin radiya. But he has switched his strategy. He has switched his strategy. Rather, what he has settled for is that he will try to chip away, instead of just trying to make you worship an idol, because he knows you're not going to do that, he's going to chip away at all the different aspects of your religion. تَحْتَقِرُونَ فِيمَا تَحْتَقِرُونَ مِنْ أَعْمَالِكُمْ. Things that you don't think are a big deal, things that you overlook, he's going to try to chip away at those things. Like your salah, he'll try to chip away at it. He'll try to get people to be disconnected from their salah and negligent about their prayer. He'll try to get them to be negligent about halal and haram. Be negligent about how they treat each other. He's going to try to chip away at your deen. So the Prophet ﷺ said, فَاحْذُرُوا مِنْهُ. So be very careful, be very cautious. Always reassess where you are. on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on an annual basis. Keep reassessing where you are, what you were doing, and where you are now. Because Shaitan will keep trying to chip away. He hasn't given up. He has just changed his strategy. Instead of trying to stick an idol in front of you and saying, worship this idol, he'll try to chip away at your religion from the outside, keep chipping away, chipping away, chipping away, till there's not much left. So he said, be very careful. That was one of the key advices of the Prophet ﷺ on that day. Very important for us to remember. On the 12th, on the next day, as the Quran says, فَمَنْ تَعَجَّلَ فِي يَوْمَيْنِ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ وَمَنْ تَأَخَّرَ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ لِمَنِ اتَّقَى. That on the 12th, people are allowed to leave early. You can basically leave on the 12th. If you want, you can stay an extra day. And then you have to do the rami, you have to throw the pebbles on the 13th, and then you leave on the 13th. So you can leave on the 12th, or you can also stay an extra day. The Prophet ﷺ stayed an extra day, but he himself told many of the Muslims, about half the people who had come there for Hajj, he himself told them that many of you live in very faraway places, remote areas. Those of you who have come from far away, start leaving early. Leave on the 12th. So they said, okay, they started making preparations and they started leaving. Before they left, before they departed, the Prophet they gathered together as they were about to depart, and everyone saying their goodbyes and farewells and things like that. And as they were departing, they came to the Prophet ﷺ, the thousands of people that were leaving. They came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said that, can you please give us some parting advice? We don't know, many of us are from faraway places, we don't know when we'll see you again. Can you give us some parting advice? And the Prophet ﷺ gave some very powerful, beautiful advice at this moment. He said, I will tell you two things. Number one, he said, لا ترجعوا بعدي كفارا. He said, number one, after I am gone, you see another hint being dropped. After I am gone, do not turn your back on God. Don't turn your back on Allah after I'm gone. Number one. And number two, he said, وَيَضْرِبُ بَعْضُكُمْ رِقَابَ بَعْضٍ. And don't turn on each other. He said two things. Two things. If you don't remember anything else, remember I told you two things. After I'm gone, don't turn your back on Allah, and don't turn against each other. That's the summary of the religion. إِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاعْبُدُونَ. Stay connected to Allah and be good to each other. And he gave them this advice. And they departed with this advice. The Prophet ﷺ, before I get to talking about the khutbah of Hajjatul Wida and some of the lessons we can take from it, the Prophet ﷺ on the 13th, he completed the Hajj. He left Mina, went to Mecca. He performed the farewell tawaf, tawaf al-Wida, and then something very interesting. There was no rush. There was no hurry. There wasn't a flight to catch. There wasn't a bus reservation. There wasn't an expiring visa. There's nothing. On the same day of the 13th, they concluded the Hajj. He went to Mecca, he prayed there, did the farewell tawaf, and departed from Mecca on the 13th. Departed from Mecca on the 13th. Do you feel why that's kind of peculiar? Or at least intriguing? What's his original home? Mecca. He was born there. He lived the first 53 years of his life there. His ancestors are all from there. His family ancestral home is there. And it's the home to the Kaaba, the most sacred place on earth, which the Prophet ﷺ loved so dearly. He was so attached to it. He didn't even stay just for the sake of just, spending some more time. He didn't even stay an extra day, he departed. And the scholars mention Imam al-Khattabi, in his Sharh al-Bukhari, he mentions that one of the reasons why the Prophet ﷺ departed that same day Hajj was to demonstrate and to show that he had every intention of keeping his promise. And what was his promise? That I will always come back home to Medina. After Fatih Makkah, the Ansar wondered, does he stay now? It's all clear now. This is home. He only came to us because this was so hostile. But Makkah is good now. Will he come back home? And remember, he told them after Fatih Makkah, after the conquest of Makkah, people will go back home with all their stuff, and you will go back home with the messenger of God. Medina is my home. So he departed that same day to demonstrate, I'm keeping my promise. I am a Medinan. And subhanAllah, it's very beautiful that when they were journeying back to Medina from Hajj, when they were on the outskirts of Medina, and in the distance you could see the mountain of Uhud, the Prophet ﷺ, he pointed to the mountain of Uhud and he said those famous words on multiple occasions, but this moment he said it as well. He pointed at the mountain of Uhud and he said, Uhud jabalun yuhibbuna wa nuhibbuhu. Uhud is a mountain, it loves us and we love it. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he started making his animal, like the camel, go faster. And he said, Hadihi taba, hadihi taba. Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she beautiful? Talking about Medina. I can see Medina. Isn't she beautiful? And he got in a rush, like when you're just happy and excited to go somewhere. And that was the Prophet ﷺ keeping his word and his promise. Now, to kind of go back a little bit and talk about the khutbah of Hajjatul Wida. Now, the khutbah of Hajjatul Wida is not very, very lengthy as compared to what we would expect. You would expect some, 100-page, essay or 300-page dissertation or something like that, right? It's not that lengthy, but by and far, it is the lengthiest public address of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. It's the longest khutbah he ever gave in his life. So it is of a decent length. Number two, it's so deep. There's so much depth to it because he addressed some very technical issues as well. And some very important issues, fundamental issues. That, for example, one of the works written by one of the classical scholars discussing the meaning of the khutbah of Hajjatul Wida is 200 pages long, just discussing the meaning. In the podcast itself, when I went over the khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ, I think we covered it in 3 sessions. It took 3 hours to go through it line by line by line by line and fully understand the depth of it. And that's not the full depth of it, just whatever I'm capable of. So it's very lengthy in that sense. There's a lot there to learn. Very beneficial, and you'll find those sessions on the podcast. I have, for the purposes of this gathering and this class, I've extracted a few points that I think are particularly relevant and beneficial that we can take from the khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ. And there's 5 points that I'd like to make. The first point from the khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ is that the Prophet ﷺ, in his khutbah of Hajjatul Wida, the Prophet ﷺ talked about the sanctity of life. The sanctity of life. How precious life is. How human life is a very sacred thing. And we do not violate human life. The Prophet ﷺ communicated that in his khutbah in a very powerful, instructive way. He asked all the companions that were gathered there, he said, Ayyu yawmin hadha? What day is today? Now, he wasn't necessarily asking what day of the week is it. He knew what day of the week it was. He was saying, what kind of a day is today? And they responded by saying, Yawmun haramun. It is a sacred day. He said, Ayyu shahrin hadha? What kind of a month is this? They said, Shahrun haram. It is a sacred month. He said, Ayyu baladin hadha? What's the nature of this place where we are talking? Arafat. They said, Baladun haramun. It's a very sacred land. Then the Prophet ﷺ said that Inna hurmata dima'ikum wa amwalikum wa a'radikum haramun alaykum ka hurmati yawmikum hadha fi shahrikum hadha fi baladikum hadihi. He said that the sacredness of life, property, personal property, and dignity, the dignity of other people, is as sacred and sanctified and holy as this day in this month at this place. Now, what does it mean for something to be sacred? Can you imagine someone in the Hajj, in Ihram, in Arafat, on the day of Arafah, with the Prophet ﷺ, doing something disrespectful? Can you imagine someone doing that? Can you even fathom that idea? Being disrespectful in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ during Hajj? No, it's unfathomable, unimaginable. The Prophet ﷺ said, just as that is completely unfathomable and unimaginable, to me, he said, and he said, to you it needs to be that violating human life, personal property, and the dignity of people should be as unimaginable and unbearable and unthinkable and unspeakable as doing something disrespectful right here, right now would be. So he established the sanctity of life. That's the first lesson I wanted to share here. It's very important. You know, and one of the things, I mean, subhanAllah, it's, you know, I think everyone can obviously understand the significance of this point today. You know, there's always going to be trouble in the world. There's always going to be ups and downs. There's always going to be different challenges in the world. There were at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, all throughout Islamic history. But if there is something very, like, truly scary and truly, like, unfortunate, evil, very uniquely today in our times, that maybe has not been at this level at any point in our history, and that is the complete loss of the sacredness of human life. Just the way that at all ends of the spectrum, from all angles, how easily human life is violated is truly shocking. Whether we're talking about, you know, militaries going into places and carpet bombing and indiscriminately just destroying entire areas and just wiping out thousands of people. That level of evil has not existed before in human history. The way that whether we're talking about how just the violence within the streets and how easily people take one another's lives, whether we're talking about, you know, what we've seen over the last few months, I mean, and even the last few years, but in the last few months, whether it's New Zealand, now Sri Lanka, and, you know, all these other places, so many that it becomes difficult to remember. That's something truly regrettable about the time that we live in. And that's why it's so important to revisit this lesson and remember that that's part of the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. We have to be the voice of reason. We have to be the voice of sanity. We have to be the voice of, you know, God consciousness, where we reestablish within the hearts and the minds of people the sanctity of human life. That's the first lesson I wanted to highlight. The second lesson I wanted to highlight here was the Prophet ﷺ on this khutbah, in this khutbah of Hajjatul Wida, on this day, he emphasized the importance of ethical financial dealings, the way we do business. He said this is very important. And this is to touch on something very specific, again, that I feel is very relevant and very important for us today, because this is a problem we have today. One of the traps, remember he said be careful because Shaitan is going to try to chip away at your religion. One of the tricks of Shaitan is Shaitan tries to compartmentalize the religion. So he says your religion is your prayer, fasting in Ramadan. But business is business. Business is business. How you make money, how you spend money, how you do business, that's something else. Don't bring religion into business. And that could not be further from the truth. For a Muslim, business is not business. Business is a part of your religion. Honesty, integrity, very important. And one of the things the Prophet ﷺ, the way he addressed that, the Prophet ﷺ said that, Inna umur al-jahiliyyati, he said that, Ala wa inna kulla shay'in min amr al-jahiliyyati mawdu'un tahta qadamayya hatayn. He said, today I end all the traditions of jahiliyyah, ignorance, pre-Islam. And he said the first thing that I'd like to abolish from the pre-Islamic era here today is usury, interest, exploiting people's needs. Someone needs to feed their family and they're looking to borrow some money to feed their family, that you exploit their needs and then you charge that usury on that money to try to bury them deeper and exploit people's desperation and need. He said, no more after today. No more after today. It's forbidden. And the Prophet ﷺ had a beautiful example where he would lead by example. The Prophet had a beautiful practice. He would lead by example. Now the Prophet ﷺ had never engaged in such a transaction. But his uncle Abbas was very wealthy before Islam. And many people had borrowed money from him. Abbas was not a bad person. It was just the standard contract in Makkah before Islam had usury built into it. So a lot of people in Makkah owed Abbas money. The Prophet ﷺ said, anyone who owes Abbas money, فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ. If you borrowed $100 from Abbas, pay him the $100 that you borrowed from him. But all the interest that was built on that is wiped out. Abbas will not collect a single penny of interest from anyone. My own family, my own blood, my own uncle will sacrifice first to reestablish financial ethics, ethical dealings. It's very important. That's why in the Quran, the lengthiest verse of the Quran, the most technical details Allah gives us for any issue in the Quran is contracts, how to do business. And at the end of it, he says, "Wattaqullah," be conscious of God. Because how you deal with money reflects your relationship with Allah. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that التاجر الصدوق الأمين مع النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. An honest, righteous, trustworthy businessman will be resurrected with the prophets and the angels and the martyrs and the pious. It's a way to earn paradise, to be good and ethical in your financial dealings. And real quickly, the last comment I'll make on this is, this has created a huge, kind of a disillusionment in our community. Everyone knows someone who is very turned off by the deen or by religious people because they've had bad financial dealings with quote-unquote religious people. Everyone knows someone like that. That should not be an excuse for me to not engage with my deen. But think about the person who gave them that impression. That's not okay. That's not okay. But we have to understand that if I pray and do all these different things, but then I'm unethical in how I do business, there's a problem in my deen. Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, a great scholar from the Islamic tradition, he wrote many, many books. His students would benefit from him a lot. His students asked him one time, they said, "Sheikh, you've written a book on so many subjects that we all benefit from, seerah, hadith, aqidah, Quran, fiqh, etc., etc. Usul. But you never wrote a book on tazkiyah, purification of the heart, how to be a good Muslim. And we know that we benefit from your lessons, but you never wrote a book on that." He said, "I did, actually." They said, "What is the book called?" He said, "It's called Kitab al-Buyu', the book on the rules of business transactions. Because that's when you really know what's in your heart. When you got money in front of you, what do? How do you conduct yourself?" The third lesson I wanted to share here, that the Prophet ﷺ emphasized in the khutbah in Hajjat al-Wida', was the Prophet ﷺ, he very famously said, لَيْسَ لِعَرَبِيٍّ عَلَى عَجَمِيٍّ فَضْلٌ وَلَا لِعَجَمِيٍّ عَلَى عَرَبِيٍّ فَضْلٌ لَكِنَّ الْفَضْلَ بِالتَّقْوَى. He said, no Arab is superior to a non-Arab in their essence, just by being Arab. And no non-Arab is superior to an Arab in their essence. And furthermore, he said that no white person has superiority automatically over a black person, nor a black person over a white person. لكن الفضل بالتقوى, but rather the virtue of every human being comes from taqwa. إن أكرمكم عند الله يتقاكم. And this is very important. This is the Prophet ﷺ addressed the issue of racism, tribalism, ta'assub. He addressed it in here. Because this eats away at our unity. And once again, at our dignity. The dignity of people. It compromises the dignity of people. And you know something very profound that Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he points out. Look at what the example the Prophet ﷺ used to demonstrate that no one is superior over another. He did it based off of language. No Arab is even superior to a non-Arab. Because if there is any language that has significance and importance, it's what language? Arabic. But why? Because Arabic just makes you a better person? It's, the Qur'an's in Arabic. So why do we study the Qur'an? Why do we learn the Arabic language? To be Arab? To understand the Qur'an. But what if somebody knows very good Arabic, but they don't use it to understand the Qur'an? Does that somehow automatically make them better? No, it doesn't. I often tell the students, the individual that I have met in my life who had the greatest mastery of the Arabic language was a professor at a university who is an atheist. I've never met. I've had senior shuyukh and teachers, great scholars, but the single individual that I met that had the greatest mastery of classical Arabic I've ever met. I had lunch with him, had coffee with him rather, one time. And I sat across from him, and he told me that he doesn't believe in God. I was astonished, baffled, speechless. And I even asked him, I said, but the way you talk about the eloquence of the Qur'an and the Qur'anic language, the way you talk about the Qur'an, you obviously think it's awesome, the way you talk about it. He said, yeah, I think it's a fascinating work of literature. But I don't believe in God. Does that person's Arabic help them? It doesn't. And yet sometimes you come across a simple person who doesn't know any Arabic. My grandmother, may Allah have mercy upon her, she could not read the Qur'an in Arabic. She couldn't read the Qur'an in Arabic. She came from a place in India where they didn't know how to read and write, so how would they ever even learn Arabic? But she used to read the Qur'an at least 8 hours a day. And I looked one time when I was a kid memorizing the Qur'an, and I looked. She had this giant mushaf. It was a transliteration. ALHAMDULILLAH, Alhamdulillah, but it was in the Gujarati script. So it was Arabic sounded out in Gujarati, in Indian language. And she used to read the Qur'an like that. I remember being a kid even telling her, that's not Qur'an. And she said, I know, Habibi, I know. So why don't you read the proper Qur'an? Look, this is what it looks like. Right? Silly child. Right? Why don't you read the proper Qur'an? And she said, I don't know how to read that. I said, why don't you know how to read that? Right? She said, no one ever taught me. No one ever taught me. She used to spend literally half her day with the Qur'an. I've never met somebody in my life who loved the Qur'an more than she did. When I used to recite, when I was memorizing the Qur'an, I was a child, 10 years old, and I would recite from memory, she would just cry. She would just cry the whole time. She told my mom, she said, you finally did something right. She's still a Desi mom, right? So she's tough, right? She said, you finally did something right. And my mom used to get mad at me. She said, stop making your grandma cry. I said, I'm not doing it. The Quran does it, right? But it's amazing. She didn't know any Arabic. But look at her relationship with the Quran. And over here, I sat with this professor dude. He can just, I've never known anybody who knew Arabic better. What's the point? So it reminds us, virtue, taqwa, your relationship with Allah. That's what defines you. And that's what defines your value and your virtue. The fourth lesson that I wanted to highlight here from the khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ And this is a very sensitive issue, a very delicate issue, but a very important one. The Prophet ﷺ in the khutbah of Hajjatul Wida, he spoke about al-mu'amalatul hasanatu ma'an nisa. He said, fattaqullaha fin nisa. He said, be conscious of God in how you treat women. The dignified and respectful dealing of women, with women. And what the Prophet ﷺ was addressing was, before Islam, how terribly women folk were treated. The Quran talks about لا يحل لكم أن ترثوا النساء كرها. They were treated like property. When somebody died, their house was inherited, their stuff was inherited, their women would be inherited. And Allah said in the Quran, no more. And when we look around in the world today, we see it hasn't gotten better. Look how the undignified, disrespectful treatment of women. Everything that we see that comes up in the news. It's really a shame. And a lot of times it's not even, and it breaks my heart to say this, but it's not even something that we can say doesn't happen not in our communities. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, "Fattaqullah fi nisa." It's such a powerful statement. He said, be conscious of God in how you treat them. Meaning, a reflection of your taqwa is how you treat women. Are you respectful? Are you kind? Are you dignified? Do you have honesty and integrity? Respect? Then that shows you have taqwa of Allah. But otherwise, you can have all the other bells and whistles, all the look of the religiousness, and be disrespectful and filthy and vile towards women. And that means you have no taqwa. You don't fear God. That's a very important lesson the Prophet ﷺ gave in the khutbah of Hajjatul Wida. And then the fifth and the last lesson that I'll highlight and emphasize here. And this is very simple. It's nothing earth-shattering. Everyone knows this. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, تَرَكْتُ فِيكُمْ أَمْرَيْنِ. I leave you with two resources. لَن تَضِلُّوا مَا تَمَسَّكْتُمْ بِهِمَا. You will never lose your way so long as you hold on to these two things. You will always be okay as long as you hold on to two things. What are those two things? He said, Kitabullah wa Sunnatu Nabiyhi. The Quran and the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Two things. Now, everyone knows that. We've talked about that before, you've heard it before, you've read it before. But what I'm trying to present it in a more meaningful way. I want us to think about it more meaningfully. We've sloganeered, we've sloganized Quran and Sunnah. It's like a slogan. It's like a billboard. Slogans are cheap. Just do it. Have it your way. Right? It's just cheap. It's advertising, marketing. It's a slogan. It's cheap. We need to make Quran and Sunnah not just a slogan. We need to actually understand the significance of it. And I go back to the point where I started. That's why I started there. The way that we can live a meaningful life and be good people and be successful is to live by the Quran and the life of the Prophet ﷺ. But you can't live by it if you don't know it. If you don't know it. And that's why the last point that I'll emphasize here from the khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ, we need to make a more serious, concerted, dedicated, meaningful effort to knowing the meaning of the Quran and to knowing the life of the Prophet ﷺ. No more slogans, no more just, yeah, Quran, 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 Quran. Everyone's heard all the sloganeering about Quran and advertising about Quran, and Quran is good, Quran is great, Quran is awesome. And I'm not disagreeing with any of that, but at some point, you got to put your money where your mouth is. Ramadan is coming. What is our actual game plan about having a relationship with the Quran? Or are we just going to spend the whole month talking about, oh, Ramadan, month of the Quran, mashallah. And I feel like I did something just by saying that. Have a real plan. And I'm not going to present something overwhelming or unattainable or unachievable here. I'm not going to say like that's why everybody needs to study like some 23-volume tafsir of the Quran. That's why everybody here needs to know classical Arabic, even though those are all later steps. I'm going to present something very simple, very attainable, very, kids call it basic. Okay? And what is that? Start tonight with half a page, one paragraph, and make it a goal to read the entirety of the translation of the Quran from cover to cover. In whatever language you are comfortable in. English for most people here, or it could be something else. It is necessary for every single Muslim to read the translation of the Quran all the way through. Now, does translation, I know all the discussion, translation is limited, it's not perfect, etc., etc. I know all that. That's why I'm the son of Pakistani parents born in Dallas, Texas, and I've spent the last 30 years of my life studying Arabic. There's a reason. Because I felt like there was more than what the translation was giving me. All right? So I understand that. But we keep using that as an excuse. Oh, translation is not perfect, so I'm going to remain ignorant. Translation is not perfect, so I'm not going to understand anything the Quran has to say. No, start somewhere. Start somewhere. Start reading the translation of the Quran. People always ask, what do you recommend in terms of translation and this and that? There's lots of good translations. One very easy one to access. It's published by the Oxford University Press. The translator is Professor Abdul Halim. And it's a very good translation. If you go on Amazon and you just search Quran, Oxford, you'll find it. $7. It'll be in the mail tomorrow. Like, there's no excuse. Start. By the end of this Ramadan, start tonight and have a goal that by the time Ramadan ends, you've read through the translation of the whole Quran. Your life will never be the same. That's one thing I do feel comfortable guaranteeing. So instead of just talking about the Quran, let's do something about it. The second thing is the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Start educating yourself on the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Pick up a seerah book and start reading through it. There's lots of resources out there. The Sealed Nectar, Ar-Rahiq al-Makhtum, very good seerah book, very authentic. Just start reading. It's very doable. It's like 200 pages. English. So just start reading comfortably. If whatever language you're comfortable in. Arabic, there's very simple, basic tafsir books written in Arabic. Nur al-Yaqeen, Fi Sirati Sayyid al-Mursaleen, 120 pages in Arabic, if you read Arabic. Urdu, Rahmat Alam, 120, 30, 40 pages. Simple, Sahal Urdu. But read the life of the Prophet ﷺ. All right? So that we stop sloganeering and we actually start living by this. But the Prophet ﷺ said, if you hold on to the Quran and the life of the Prophet ﷺ, these two things, you'll never lose your way, you'll always be okay. And the last thing I'll mention here before we break for Salat al-Isha is while the Prophet ﷺ was giving this khutbah, Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu, he says that I kind of felt like this was a very special moment. There were over 120,000 Muslims gathered. He said, I stood up on the back of my camel. Stood up on the back of my camel. And he said, I looked in front of me and there were people as far as the eye could see. I looked behind me, there were people as far as the eye could see. I looked to my right, I looked to my left, and the crowd was never ending. And I realized we had finally arrived at that moment. Islam had arrived. Wa Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam fina. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was still alive amongst us. And how powerful and beautiful that moment was. So, like I said before, once the Hajj was concluded, they made their way back to Medina. The next 2.5 months, almost 3 months, it was business as usual. Life went back to normal. The Prophet ﷺ continued living his life up until the 4th or 5th of Rabi'ul Awwal, in the 11th year of Hijrah. And from there, inshallah, after Salat al-Isha, we'll pick up and then we'll talk about the last week of the life of the Prophet. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah Shaykh. We're going to take a few minutes. If anybody needs to renew their wudu, please, the bathrooms are downstairs for the men and upstairs for the women. So in a couple minutes, we'll be making it then and then starting Salat al-Isha.
Such a big girl. Hey, how's it going? It's been too long. How are you? Good. How's your partner in crime?
He's done Texas.
Really?
Yeah.
Austin, yeah. That's what his sister told me he's in Austin.
They're all moved down to Austin.
Mashallah.
Inshallah, I'm going to try to look for those
Inshallah.
Year and a half. 17.
I remember when y'all came out to Dallas last year.
No, that's
So he used to, yeah, he did the dream program. So he's with what are you guys down there? We have a good time on
such a great experience.
2013. Yeah, it was a good experience.
So if I want to consult you about something, you definitely have like 10 minutes. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, get a nice corner for her.
It was really good to see you.
Good to see you too. Muhammad now. When you came, it was just Aisha Radio. Yeah, Muhammad was born the next year in fall of 2014. Yeah. The girls are big now, mashallah.
Yeah.
Mariam's 11, almost 12. Yeah. Going on 12. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Meadowlands. What? So okay. So I've been so I've just been it's been so hectic for me. I barely able to keep up. So I was just telling him, I'm barely able to keep up with what's going on in the NBA playoffs. I didn't realize the NFL draft came and went.
That's why I didn't realize it.
Wow.
The second in Paris today.
So what about that quarterback everyone was talking about?
He won first.
Who took him first?
Was it Arizona? Yeah, I think it was Arizona Cardinals. Now they have to trade the quarterback last year.
Oh,
It looks like they have to trade it.
Rose and that's right. And then, yeah, I know the Giants obviously they traded Odell and everything. How did they still got Saquon. That was a good one. And they still got Saquon. There's a generational talent. But so they drafted a QB.
The Giants?
Yeah. Hey, good to meet you. But no one's happy with that QB? Yeah, it's crazy.
الله أكبر الله أكبر حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استووا اعتدلوا صلوا الصفوف تراصوا straighten the lines fill in the gaps. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين
آمين.
والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون فما يكذبك بعد بالدين أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
آمين.
إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها وأخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها بأن ربك أوحى لها يومئذ يصدر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يره. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
their sunan, and if anybody needs to use the restroom, and then we'll be getting started again, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
expected to hear? 30? Most of the like the major, like most of the meetings are usually always within 30 minutes to an hour. I mean, there are the out of line meetings like a meeting, but they're not they're not the major
Like when you're going to like yard, like pieces of Jersey as a pocket community, for like Central Jersey, and then you'll have a bunch of other
they're like bigger communities.
yeah, but ironically, the southern one was the oldest one.
Was it just maybe people went there usually for work and stuff?
I think so. Those places are still smaller, but I guess it's just how it worked out. People so you go to the smaller ones that actually
Yeah, the older immigration was also a little bit more labor focused, and the later immigration was education focused. So I guess that was like the settled in Central Illinois. And down there was where the work was at. Yeah, down there is like 40.
Inshallah, we'll be getting started. Firstly, for anybody that joined us from Salat al-Isha, welcome. We have Sheikh Abdul Nasser Janga from Dallas joining us today to talk about the final days of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And without any further ado, part 2, inshallah.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. What we're going to be talking about now is, as I mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ came back from Hajjatul Wida. And it took about a week to get back. So the Prophet ﷺ was back in Medina by the 20th or 21st of the month of the Hijjah, with about 8-9 days remaining in the year. The next month, the month of Muharram, the month after that, the month of Safar, those 2 months, plus these about, 10 days or so, 8-9 days, plus the first 4 to 5 days of the third month, the third lunar month of the calendar, Rabi'ul Awwal. So that puts it about 2.5 months. The next 2.5 months, the Prophet ﷺ, that's why the scholars typically mention, 70 أو 80 أياما بعد رجوعه من حجة الوداع. About 70 to 80 days after returning back from the farewell pilgrimage, the Prophet ﷺ, he continued on. Obviously there was a difference. It was noticeable. The Prophet ﷺ was older. He was a bit of a step slower, physically, if you will. The Prophet ﷺ used to walk around Medina a lot, checking on everyone. Instead of walking around, he used to ride a donkey that he had around Medina. Instead of walking everywhere, he'd ride the donkey. When the Prophet ﷺ would sit down, it would take a little bit longer for him to get back up. That's why Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Usama ibn Zayd, people like this, Anas radiallahu anhu, Abdullah bin Abbas, these young companions who would benefit from the Prophet ﷺ and kind of served as like personal assistants to the Prophet ﷺ, they started carrying a pillow with them. We saw that to Nabi Sallallahu. They started carrying a pillow with them, so they put kind of a pillow for him to sit on, because again, he was a little bit older now, and you could definitely see the physical effects of it. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that on some nights when he would be offering his nightly prayers, like 2 hours before Fajr, his tahajjud, his qiyam, instead of standing up and praying, he would actually sit down for a little while, and he wasn't able to stand for the 2 hours anymore. So he was definitely showing some physical signs of aging. There's a very kind of very touching moment where Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was 2 years younger than the Prophet ﷺ. He was 2 years younger than the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ often used to tease him. He used to tell him that you're younger than me, but you look older than me. Because Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was a little bit more heavy set and more white hair, and he was like me basically. So he used to tease him. He said, I'm older, but you look older. And then finally, in that last year of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he started having some grays and some whites. And Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu says he counted 14 white hairs in the beard of the Prophet ﷺ. So he said one day he was sitting with him during these 2.5 months, and he said, Shibta ya Rasulullah, oh, look who's an old man now. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told him, he said, I still look younger than you. And then the Prophet ﷺ shared a very powerful reflection. He said, it's not age it's not the years that have aged me. It's the heaviness of the Quran that causes this aging that you see on me. So, nevertheless, like I'm saying, the Prophet ﷺ definitely showed signs of being older, physically a little bit. But for the most part, it was, as they say, for lack of a better expression, business as usual. Daily events and daily things were going on and continuing. It is finally the Prophet ﷺ, kind of working backwards from here. The Prophet ﷺ passed away on the 12th day of the month of Rabiul Awwal, and it was a Monday. He passed away Monday morning, the 12th of Rabiul Awwal. So about a week before that, right? Sunday night, basically leading into Monday morning. That night, early Monday morning, the Prophet ﷺ, he had his nightly routine of tahajjud, qiyam. So a couple of hours before Fajr, he would basically wake up, he'd come out of his home, he would go to use the restroom, he would make wudu, he'd come back, and then he'd pray for an hour or two, and then he'd go for the Fajr prayer to the Masjid, which was right next door to his home. The Prophet ﷺ came out of his home, and the different companions would be appointed every day to basically assist him, just be with him. The Prophet ﷺ was very big on the buddy system at night, nobody go out on your own, right? And then on top of that, because of, again, to physically just assist the Prophet ﷺ, different companions would have turns on different days. The companion on that night who was appointed to assist the Prophet ﷺ, right, just have the water jug ready, have his walking stick ready, and things like that, help him in making wudu, so on and so forth. His name is Abu Muwayhiba. Abu Muwayhiba, Mawla Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He used to be a slave, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam freed him from slavery. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam paid his slave owner paid him and then released him and made him free when he became Muslim. So Abu Muwayhiba, he was assisting the Prophet ﷺ that night, and he says the Prophet ﷺ came out. He said, I was already awake, I didn't want to be late, so I got there early, and I was just waiting outside his house whenever he comes out. And before I expected him to, before he normally would, he came out early. So I jumped up, I was like, wow, he's early today. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Muwayhiba, inni umirtu an azura haula, fantadiq ma'i. He says, before, first he said he came out early, we went to go, I accompanied him, he went, he used the restroom, made wudu and everything, and then on the way back, he said, Abu Muwayhiba, God has commanded me to go visit these folks, come with me. And he pointed in the direction of the graveyard of Medina, Al-Baqiyah, Jannat Al-Baqiyah. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, I've been told to go visit them, pay my respects. So he says we went. The Prophet ﷺ went there, and he of course recited the dua, the supplication, Assalamu alaikum ya ahl al-diyar, Assalamu alaikum ya ahl al-qubur. And then the Prophet ﷺ said something very fascinating. He said, Innakum, he said that you are in a better place than where we are. He said, you're in a better place than we are. And then the Prophet ﷺ went on to say, سَتَكُونُ فِتَنٌ كَقَطْعِ اللَّيْلِ الْمُظْلِمِ آخِرُهَا آخِرُ الْفِتْنَةِ أَوَّلُ فِتْنَةِ الْأُخْرَى. He said that soon there are very dark times coming ahead. And with the ending of each particular difficulty, the next one will begin. وَالْآخِرَةُ أَشَدُّ مِنَ الْأُولَى. And each subsequent challenge will become greater and greater. And then after saying this, Abu Muwayhiba says, I was listening very, intently, and it was very intriguing. I didn't fully understand what he was saying, like what he was referring to. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, he told him, Muwayhiba, let's go home. Let's go back. Time to pray. And he said, while we were walking back, he says that the Prophet ﷺ said to me, خُيِّرْتُ بَيْنَ. He says that I was given the choice, بَقَائِي فِي الدُّنْيَا, الْخُلْدَ فِي الدُّنْيا وَمَفَاتِيحَ خَزَائِنِ الدُّنْيا وَخُيِّرْتُ بَيْنَ هَذِهِ وَبَيْنَ لِقَاءِ رَبِّي وَالْجَنَّةِ. He says, I was given the choice of either remaining in this world till the end of the world and being given all the resources of the world, ثُمَّ الْجَنَّةِ, and then going to paradise in the hereafter, وَبَيْنَ لِقَاءِ رَبِّي وَالْجَنَّةِ. Or I was given the choice to return back now to my Lord and then go into paradise. Abu Muwayhiba says, when the Prophet ﷺ said this, he said, my heart almost jumped out of my chest. And I said, اختر البقاء يا رسول الله بأبي أنت وأمي اختر البقاء. He said, I would give anything for you, O Messenger of God. Please choose to stay here with us. And he said that the Prophet ﷺ said to me at that time, لا يا أبا موهبة بل اخترت لقاء ربي والجنة. I want to go be with my Lord. He says we came home and the Prophet ﷺ prayed that night. He went for Fajr in the morning. When he returned back from Fajr, Monday morning, a week before he passed away, the Prophet ﷺ started feeling very ill. It started off by feeling like kind of feverish. He said his head was hurting. He felt very fatigued and tired. Started feeling sick. It wasn't so bad where he wasn't functional. So it stayed, he continued on throughout the day. But by that evening, it just kept getting more and more severe. More and more severe. So much so that by the evening, he kind of needed help standing up. And he requested somebody to come to the house to help him walk to the masjid so he could kind of lean on somebody. Now, because of that, the Prophet ﷺ asked the Ummahatul Mu'mineen, the mothers of the believers, his wives, if it would be okay if he could go وَأَتَمَرَّضُ فِي بَيْتِ عَائِشَةَ. Can I go and stay until I don't, while I'm not feeling well, feeling physically well, is it okay if I go and stay at Aisha's home? And obviously, reason number one, obviously everybody knows about the relationship the Prophet ﷺ and Aisha had was very special. Secondly, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha's home was very convenient. Because if this is the place where the Prophet ﷺ would lead the prayer, that door right there, that utility room, was basically the home of Aisha. Very direct access. That's why where the Prophet ﷺ rests today is actually the home of Aisha. Alright? So it was very convenient. Number three, as we kind of know in hindsight, the Prophet ﷺ would pass away in this illness. And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, who was going to be taking over, it would be easier for him to access the Prophet ﷺ in the home of Aisha. Because Aisha was Abu Bakr's daughter. So it's easier for him, right? There's less issues of privacy versus any of the other wives of the Prophet ﷺ. So nevertheless, the Prophet ﷺ said, can I go stay at Aisha's home while I'm not feeling well? They all said, of course, whatever is easy and convenient for you, Ya Rasulullah. Your health and your well-being comes first. So the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, perfect. The Prophet ﷺ that night went over to Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha's home. The next couple of days, so this was Monday, Tuesday, the next day or so, the Prophet ﷺ, Tuesday and Wednesday, he continued going to the masjid for the prayer. He was obviously a lot closer, but he still could not walk on his own. So Fadl bin Abbas, his cousin, Ali bin Abi Talib, his cousin, and his son-in-law, they would come before the prayer, they would physically help the Prophet ﷺ stand up. Yuhadi bayna ithnain, he would put his arms around their shoulders, and then they would help him walk. Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu says the Prophet ﷺ started becoming so weak while even walking to the prayer that he was a little bit taller than Fadl and Ali. That at one point while they were kind of carrying him, he had his arms around their shoulders, around their necks like this, and they were kind of holding him by the waist. That at one point his feet gave out. And he said, take me, keep going. And so they said they carried him, and we saw the feet of the Prophet ﷺ dragging behind him, leaving trails in the dirt. But he still went for the prayer. And the Prophet ﷺ finally got to the point on Wednesday when he came for the prayer, like where I'm describing his feet were just giving out, where he couldn't even stand and lead the prayer, so he sat and led the prayer. Finally, Thursday morning arrives. Now, Thursday morning, it's a very particular event occurs. Thursday morning, the Prophet ﷺ, from an hour before Fajr, he's trying to sit up. He's awake. He's been awake most of the night. The fever is very bad. And he's trying to sit up. And he physically just can't. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, I tried to get behind him and just kind of like push him up, prop him up. But he just could not sit on his own. There was like no energy, no strength left. And we kept on trying. He said, keep trying. He wanted to keep trying until the time for the adhan of Fajr came. Now the interesting thing about the habit of the Prophet ﷺ is Bilal would call the adhan for Fajr, radiallahu anhu. And a lot of the times the Prophet ﷺ would remind Bilal, Arihna biya ya Bilal, go call the adhan. And sometimes even if he didn't remind him, as soon as Bilal radiallahu anhu would start calling the adhan, the Prophet ﷺ would walk out right away. By the time Bilal was done calling the adhan, the Prophet ﷺ would be there. That morning, Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu came, he waited, he called the adhan. He got done calling the adhan, and something happened for the very first time. He got done calling the adhan and he looked around, and the Prophet ﷺ was nowhere to be seen. He didn't come out. So he said, One narration actually mentions that Bilal radiallahu anhu called the adhan the second time. Just because it was so like bizarre. Where's the Prophet ﷺ? So he figured maybe I didn't call the adhan right. One narration mentions he called the adhan the second time. Still no Prophet ﷺ. Sahaba started to gather. Prayer time is here. Meanwhile, the Prophet ﷺ started reaching the realization that I physically am not just going to be able to go today for prayer. So the Prophet ﷺ told Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, Muri Abu Bakr falyusalli bin nas. Go tell Abu Bakr he needs to lead the prayer. It's a very interesting conversation. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she said to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, with all due respect and of course very humbly speaking, is it possible for someone else to lead the prayer? Not objecting to the decision of the Prophet ﷺ, but she had a reason. She says, Inna Abu Bakr rajulun bakka. She said Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu is a very soft-hearted person. My dad is very soft-hearted. I know him. She said, if you tell him to stand where you're supposed to be standing, he won't be able to stand there. Like he just won't be able to do it. She said he'll cry so much, no one will understand what he's reading in the prayer. Like it'll just tear him apart. Please, the Prophet ﷺ said, tell Abu Bakr to lead the prayer. He was setting the precedent. She said, okay. So she went to go tell her father that he was to lead the prayer. Meanwhile, some of the Sahaba had gathered together and they started talking. People were waiting for the prayer to start. And they started talking and they said, what do we do? What do we do? Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was correct in this because he had had an experience on one of the journeys of the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet ﷺ got delayed and Abdurrahman bin Auf started leading the prayer, and the Prophet ﷺ came and joined in, and afterwards he said, this is correct, that's what you're supposed to do. So Abdurrahman bin Auf, he was there and he said, look, if the Prophet ﷺ is not able to make it, someone else needs to step up and lead the prayer. And he even said, since I don't see Abu Bakr, he said, Umar, you lead the prayer. Umar radiallahu ta'ala very reluctantly stepped forward. They called the Iqamah. The Prophet ﷺ inside, he hears the Iqamah. And then he hears Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu telling people to straighten the lines. And he hears Umar's voice. Umar had a very loud voice. He hears Umar's voice telling them to straighten the lines. The Prophet ﷺ is lying inside the apartment of Aisha right there. He gathers and musters all the strength that he can. And he screams loudly from inside the apartment. La la. فَلْيُصَلِّ بِكُمْ ابْنُ أَبِي قُحَافَةَ. He said, no. I told you. Abu Bakr leads the prayer. Ibn Abi Quhafa, the son of Abu Quhafa. Abu Quhafa was Abu Bakr's father's name. So he said he needs to lead the prayer. Umar radiallahu ta'ala heard the Prophet say that, and he stepped back and they waited. Abu Bakr radiallahu arrived right at that moment. And he came and he led the prayer. This was about Thursday morning. Thursday Fajr. Throughout the rest of the day, two sides. The condition of the Prophet ﷺ continued to worsen, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu continued to lead the prayer. And at this time, there's some narrations about some people coming to visit the Prophet ﷺ because his physical condition was becoming worse and worse. It's mentioned that Mughira bin Shu'bah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was like the bodyguard of the Prophet ﷺ when they would travel on the military expeditions, he would be appointed for the protection of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a warrior. He came to see the Prophet ﷺ. I heard you're not feeling well, I went to check on you. And he says that he placed his hand on the chest of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that he had to move his hand. It was burning up. Fever was so severe. He said, إِنَّكَ تُوعَكُ وَعْكًا شَدِيدًا يَا رَسُولِ. You're burning up. Similarly, other people were coming to see and visit the Prophet ﷺ. There's a very interesting story where a lady, an older lady who had become Muslim, she had some questions for the Prophet ﷺ. So she came to ask the Prophet ﷺ the questions. The Prophet ﷺ obviously physically was not well. Nevertheless, he answered some of her questions. It seemed like she had some more questions. The Prophet ﷺ said, don't worry, come back and ask your questions later. And then he told her something very interesting. He said that if you come back, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدِينِ, if you don't find me here, فَأَتِي أَبَا بَكْرٍ, just go ask your questions to Abu Bakr. Ask Abu Bakr your questions if you come back and you don't find me. So in this way, the Prophet ﷺ had some interesting interactions during this time. Finally, the day of Friday goes by as well. The condition of the Prophet ﷺ continues to worsen. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, the Prophet ﷺ asked me for a scarf. He said, go get like a scarf, like a piece of cloth. And she said that I tied it around, he asked me to tie it around his head. So she says that I tied it around his head, and he told me to tighten it because his head was just, pounding. So tie it tightly to help with the headache. She said that the Prophet ﷺ asked me for a bowl of water. And he said, put it next to me. And he would keep putting his hand in the bowl of water and wiping his face with it. It eventually got so bad that the Prophet ﷺ, he couldn't keep his eyes open. He would keep his eyes closed. He eventually didn't even have the strength to speak. Usama radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Usama ibn Zayd, he is the son of Zayd bin Haritha, who was like the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ. And his mother was like one of the dearest people to the Prophet ﷺ, Ayman. So Usama was very beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. They called him Hibbu Rasulillah, the beloved of the Messenger of God. He said, I came to see the Prophet ﷺ, and he was lying there with his eyes closed, wiping water on his face, and he couldn't talk. He opened when I said Assalamu alaikum, he opened his eyes, he saw me, And he said he raised his hands up to the sky and he pointed to me, and they pointed to the sky and he pointed to me, and he said, فَهِمْتُ أَنَّهُ كَانَ يَدْعُو لِي. I understood that what he was saying was, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you. In this way, it continued getting worse and worse and worse. Finally, Saturday, not Saturday, throughout Saturday as well, his condition was just getting worse and worse. Finally, it came to the point of Sunday. Now on Sunday, it was almost noontime. The Prophet ﷺ told Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, go get Hafsa. Go get Hafsa. You're going to need some help. She says, I went and I got Hafsa radiallahu anha. When she came as well, the Prophet ﷺ told both of us, go fill sab'u qirab. Qirab basically refers to like water skins. Think of it as buckets. He said, go get 7 buckets of water. So she says, we went and we got 7 buckets of water. And then he said, pour all that water on me while he was lying in bed. And they poured all the 7 buckets of water on him. And she said, after we poured all the water on him, he opened his eyes and he sat up by himself. It's like he got a second wind. He then said, help me, obviously, change into dry clothes. And then call someone to come and get me. So they said we helped him change. Ali and Fadl, they came running. But obviously, because they were, for the last 3 days, they were on the routine of Abu Bakr would come and lead the prayer. Dhuhr prayer had already started. They came and they got the Prophet ﷺ and they came through the curtain on the side. Obviously, it was very noticeable. There was movement there. And everyone's heart was kind of fixated on that spot anyways. They started bringing the Prophet ﷺ up to where Abu Bakr was leading the prayer from. When Abu Bakr realized they were bringing the Prophet ﷺ, he started stepping back in the salah for the Prophet ﷺ to come and take over. The Prophet ﷺ gestured with his hand, Makanak, stay your place. Abu Bakr stopped backing up and he stood his place. They set the Prophet ﷺ down next to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr finished leading the prayer and the Prophet ﷺ prayed along with them. When the prayer was done, the Prophet ﷺ told them, help me sit on the minbar, the pulpit. They helped him sit on the minbar. Once the Prophet ﷺ sat on the minbar, he addressed the ummah. And this was the last public address of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. He, after praising and glorifying Allah, the Prophet ﷺ made dua for the shuhada of Uhud, the martyrs of Uhud. Said, may Allah reward them. They sacrificed their lives so that we could be here today. He remembered them and made dua for them and praised them. After that, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that he addressed the ummah and he said, Ya ma'ashar al-muhajirin. He said, oh, muhajirun, because there were 2 parts of the Medinan community. They were not segregated, but just 2 types of people. Muhajirin, mostly the Meccans, the Quraysh, and then there were the Ansar, the local Medinans. He said, Ya ma'ashar al-muhajirin, innakum asbahtum tazidun. He said, oh muhajirin, you are very soon going to find yourself in a position of prominence. He said, wal ansar ala hay'atiha la tazid. He said the Ansar won't necessarily rise to prominence, they will remain who they are. Meaning the keepers of the city of Medina. It's not a small thing, but he said you will remain the keepers of the city of Medina. And then the Prophet ﷺ said to the Muhajirin, however, O Muhajirin, my wasiya, usi ilaykum. I have a request to make of you. Al-Ansar, hum aybati allati awaytu ilayha. He said, the Ansar are my people, whom I sought refuge with. When I had nowhere to go, I came to them. They are my people. The Ansar are my people. So he said, فَأَكْرِمُوا كَرِيمَهُمْ. If they are good, be good to them. وَتَجَاوَزُوا عَنْ مُسِيئِهِمْ. And if they are bad, forgive them. Like if they mess up, forgive them. If they are good, be good to them. Honor them, respect them. If they mess up, forgive it. They're my people. They took care of me. They took care of me. Don't forget that. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he said that إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَيَّرَ عَبْدَهُ. God gave his slave a choice to remain in this world till the end of the world and then go to paradise, or to meet his Lord now and then go to paradise. The second the Prophet ﷺ said that, and then he didn't finish the sentence, the second he said that, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu started crying, started sobbing, weeping. You know, like a child cries. Started crying severely. He was sitting right in front. He started crying so severely, shaking, crying, that the Prophet ﷺ had to tell him to calm down. Ala rislika ya Abu Bakr. Pull yourself together, Abu Bakr. Don't do this, not now. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, Assalamu alaikum. And he told Ali and Fadl, he said, take me home. And he went back to the home. And from what the Prophet ﷺ said, that God gave his slave a choice to remain in this world or to go now, that was basically the most explicitly the Prophet ﷺ had told everyone that he was leaving. From that, everyone figured out that this is the end of the Prophet ﷺ's time in this world. From that point, this was Sunday afternoon, Medina was just gripped with this reality that any moment we could lose him. When the Prophet ﷺ went back home Sunday afternoon, it basically became a time where people were, especially those who were close to the Prophet ﷺ, were coming to say their farewells. Mostly it was the family, everyone kind of allowed the family space. And later that evening, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, in a hadith of Sahih Muslim, she shares something very profound, very powerful, a moment. She says that all the family of the Prophet ﷺ was gathered around him. The wives of the Prophet ﷺ, many of the uncles, and just the family, the aunts, the cousins, so on and so forth. Everyone was gathered there. And everyone was sitting around him quietly. The Prophet ﷺ was lying there, his eyes closed, he couldn't talk. He had that bowl of water, he was wiping water on his face. Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, the Prophet ﷺ opened his mouth a few times, and I went close to try to hear what he was saying. And I could make out the words, As-salah, as-salah, wa ma malakat aymanukum. As-salah, as-salah, wa ma malakat aymanukum. Take care of your prayer, take care of your prayer, and be good to the people that you are in charge of. And he said, I heard him say this a few times. The Prophet ﷺ was lying there, and once he spoke and he advised, because some of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ started crying more severely, and he advised them, and he said, do not wail and mourn very dramatically when I die, because that's not appropriate. Nevertheless, he was there, everyone was sitting around him. And then Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, something happened. The Prophet ﷺ opened his eyes and he started looking at the door. Everyone was sitting towards him. So he said, we had our backs to the door, and he started looking at the door, like staring. His gaze was just fixed. And she said, we turned around, and standing at the door was Fatima. Fatima, Sayyida Fatima Zahra radiallahu ta'ala anha, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ was given 7 children, was blessed with 7 children in his life. 6 of his 7 children passed away during his lifetime. His only child to survive him was Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, and she would be so devastated and heartbroken by his passing that she never recovered and passed away 6 months later. The Prophet ﷺ, he opens his eyes, he looks, and Fatima radiallahu anha is standing there. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says something very beautiful. She says that Fatima was the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, which we all know, but she's saying it in like, she was unmistakably the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. She actually looked like the Prophet ﷺ. She had the same facial features. She used to walk like the Prophet ﷺ. She talked like the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ used to speak with his hands, right? Egyptians know what I'm talking about, right? So Fatima, when she would talk with her hands as well. And Aisha says even the way Fatima walked, like it was like you were watching the Prophet ﷺ walk. So, and that's why after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ one time, Hassan, the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu saw him in the masjid and he picked him up and put him on his shoulder. And he said to Hassan, he said, Ya Shabiha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You look just like your grandfather. Because Hassan looked like his mother Fatima, who looked like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, you look just like your grandfather. And then he said, it's a good thing you don't look like your dad. And Ali was sitting there, he started laughing. He said, that's true, I'm glad he doesn't look like me either. He looks like his grandfather. He looks like his mom. But nevertheless, Fatima radiallahu anha was standing at the door. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, when we all turned around and saw Fatima there, it's like the seas parted. Everyone moved out of the way. Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha came and sat down next to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and held his hand. And she was seeing his condition. She said, Wa karaba abata. Wa karaba abata. Why does my father have to suffer? And he said to her, he said, La karba ala abiki ba'da al-yawm. Don't worry. Your father will not suffer after today. And then while she sat there holding his hand, the Prophet ﷺ gestured to her, come close. I can't talk. She went close and she put her ear to the mouth of the Prophet ﷺ and he whispered something in her ear. And she started to cry, very severely. And then he called her close again. And she put his ear to his mouth and he whispered something and then she started smiling through her tears. And then she sat there for a little while longer, said her farewells to her father, and then she left. And that was the last time they met in this world. Weeks later, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha said, that entire moment was burned into my memory. It was just preserved in my head, in my heart. So I waited weeks, because the passing of the Prophet ﷺ was very traumatic. Weeks later, I went to Fatima and she said, I asked her, if you don't mind, if you would, can you tell me what he said to you? And she said, yes, I'll tell you. She said that when he called me first, he whispered in my ear. You know, let me preface this to help frame this so you can understand. If someone's mother is very ill, at the end of her life, deathbed, okay? Obviously confirmed by everyone, this is the end. When that person comes to you and says, my mother is very, very sick, please make dua for her, pray for her. What dua do they request? That Allah yashfiha, that Allah gives her shifa. You see that? He knows she's dying. He knows. She's 89 years old. She has cancer. He knows that she's dying. But what does he still say? Because he's a son. He's a child. What does he say? Oh Allah, give her shifa. He doesn't say, oh Allah, make dua that she passes easily. No, because I can't ever accept that my mom's going to leave me. Because I love her. Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, she says, I could not fathom living in this world without my dad. I lost my mom, I lost my sisters, I lost my brothers. I couldn't lose my dad. So she had not accepted that the Prophet ﷺ was leaving. So she says when the Prophet ﷺ called her close, he whispered in her ear, he said, "Oh Fatima, I am leaving." He confirmed it, I am leaving. And he said, I've known since Ramadan that my time is coming to a close. She said that, he said, every Ramadan, كان جبريل يأتيني ويعارضني القرآن ويدارسني القرآن مرة. He said every Ramadan Jibreel would come to me and I would read to him the entirety of what had been revealed from the Quran. This past Ramadan when he came to me, after I finished it once, he said do it once more. When he made me do it marratain, twice over, I knew that this was in preparation of the end. And the Prophet ﷺ, that's why he had been dropping those hints and said, when he said Mu'ad to Yemen, he says that when you come back, he says you might find my grave here. When they went for Hajj, remember what he said. فَلَعَلِّي لَا أَحُجُّ بَعْدَ عَامِي هَذَا. I might not do Hajj with y'all again. They've been dropping these hints. So he told Fatima in that moment, I am in fact leaving. And she said, that's why I started to cry. Because it was the first time it became real to me that I might have to live in this world without my dad. And then he called me close again and he whispered to me, which made me smile when you saw me smile. He said, however, you will be the first of my family to join me in the hereafter. And we'll all be together again soon. Your sisters, your brothers, your mom, all of us will be together soon. And she passed away 6 months later. And she said, that's why I smiled. Nevertheless, that night when everyone dispersed, she says that night was very, very, very rough. She said the Prophet ﷺ's condition became so severe that night. She said he kept saying, La ilaha illallah, inna lil mawti sakaratun. La ilaha illallah, inna lil mawti sakaratun. He kept saying La ilaha illallah, and he said that death, there are the pangs of death, the pains of dying. I feel it. And she said that whole night was very tough. She said when Fajr time came, the morning time came, Bilal called the Adhan. Everyone gathered for the prayer. And she said that the Prophet ﷺ was lying there. He said, help me sit up. She said, I helped him sit up. And then he kind of scooted over. He said, help me scoot over closer to the door, the curtain. So she said, I helped him scoot over a little bit close to the curtain. And then the Prophet ﷺ told her, he said, alaykum bil hijab. He said, go ahead and cover up. I'm going to open the curtain. So she said, I covered up. Meanwhile, Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, we were all, that night, no one slept in Medina. The masjid was full all night. So when Fajr time came, everyone was already there. And everyone was just sitting there, just lost in their own thoughts. And he said that it was very interesting. He said while we were waiting there for Fajr to start after the Adhan, some Sahaba who were sitting there, they started having a conversation with each other. And one of them said that, I feel like when I close my eyes, I can't see his face. Do you remember what the Prophet said? Do you remember? You know, just everyone's grieving. Everyone's trying to understand what's going on. So it kind of, at some level, like freaking out a little bit. Understandably so. And he said, while we were sitting there and everyone's sad and upset and confused and overwhelmed, and some guys were saying, do you remember what the Prophet looked like? Do you remember what he looks like? He says, meanwhile, the Prophet ﷺ scoots close to the curtain. And then the Prophet ﷺ grabs the curtain and he moves it aside. And the Sahaba say, Jabir says, when the curtain moved, everyone's like heart jumped up into their throat. When they saw the curtain move. And the Prophet ﷺ moved the curtain and he leaned forward, stuck his head out, his neck out, and he smiled. That beautiful smile that the Sahaba would compare to the full moon. He smiled and he looked And he smiled at everyone. And they say that he scanned the whole masjid. Jabir says every single person there that day felt like he made eye contact with every single person. He said that moment felt like, it was a moment, it was a couple of seconds, but it felt like it lasted forever. Like time froze. And he just scanned through, making eye contact with everyone, smiling, looking at everyone. And Anas says that that moment was a gift to us from Allah. Because he said from that point on forward, anytime we close our eyes, we can see the smiling face of the Prophet. And he scanned the whole room and he looked at everyone, smiled at everyone. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, as soon as he saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he started backing up. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gestured to him again. Stay. That's your spot now. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I forgot to mention this before, sorry about this. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the day before on Sunday, when he gave that last public address, he actually mentioned Abu Bakr. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna min amanni nasi alayya binafsihi wa malihi Abu Bakr." He said, the person who has done the greatest favors to me with their resources and with their wealth is Abu Bakr. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, "Saddu hadhihi al-abwab al-mufattaha fil masjid." The Prophet ﷺ, the way they had kind of built the masjid, people lived around the masjid, they had all opened like a little back door that would open directly into the masjid. The Prophet ﷺ said, that's not appropriate, it's a masjid, not your backyard. He said, close all these doors except for the door of Abu Bakr. Close all these doors that open up into the masjid from your homes except for the door of Abu Bakr. The brothers will know that when the brothers, where they go to say salam at Masjid Nabawi, if you've ever been, Babu Salam, where you enter in from, before you enter Babu Salam, if you stand right out, you know where you walk that whole way? Before you enter into there, to your left, the next door over is called Bab Abi Bakr, Babu Siddiq. If you go in there, you even see an inscription above the door, Hadihi Khawkhatu Abi Bakr. You're standing in the home of Abu Bakr when you walk in that door. So he said, close all these doors except for the door of Abu Bakr. Nevertheless, at this time, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu started moving back, and the Prophet ﷺ says, stay there now. And then he closed the curtain, and the Sahaba say that was the last time we saw the Prophet ﷺ. Later that morning, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha tells us what transpired. Her brother, Abdurrahman ibn Abi Bakr, her brother, he was positioned outside the home, the apartment of Aisha, to just be posted there on call if she needs anything, whatever she needs. So he was posted outside there. She says later that morning, the condition of the Prophet ﷺ got worse. And it got to the point where he was having trouble breathing. He started wheezing, trying to catch his breath. He couldn't breathe. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, I became very worried. So she says, just to kind of help him breathe, she says, I went and I sat behind him. I kind of propped him up a little bit. I sat behind him and leaned him against me so that his head was right here. His head was on me. I was holding him in my arms, holding him so that he could maybe breathe more easily. And he was having trouble breathing. And she said because of the sound of him wheezing, she says that during that time, she says my brother Abdurrahman, he heard that noise. So he came in, is everything okay? And he saw me holding the Prophet ﷺ. He said, okay, I'm sorry. And as he was leaving, he was holding in his hand like a stick. He was kind of playing with it, fiddling with it. He had it in his hand. And so what they used to use to brush their teeth at that time was siwak. The arak tree. It was a type of tree. They would take the branches of it. It has moisture inside of it. It's wet inside. And they would basically cut it and then chew up the end of it to make bristles, and they would use it to brush their teeth, clean their mouth. So she said that Abdurrahman had a new, fresh branch in his hand. He hadn't used it yet. And he was just holding it in his hand, kind of fiddling with it. And so he came in and he saw it and he said, I'm sorry. And he started to leave. And the Prophet ﷺ raised his hand and he pointed at him. And Abdurrahman froze. He said, what? He didn't understand. He just froze. He said, what? And she said, I knew. Because the Prophet ﷺ used to be so particular about hygiene that he used to do the siwak every time he did wudu. He did it before every salah. She said even while he was fasting, he would do the siwak so much. She said one time during Ramadan, I tried to count how many times he would do the siwak. I lost count. So she said, I recognized what he was talking about. So I told Abdurrahman, give me the stick in your hand. Give me the siwak, the miswak. Give it to me. So he gave it to me, and then he left the room. Now it was fresh. It hadn't been kind of loosened up on the end, so you have to kind of chew on it and loosen it up on the end. But the Prophet ﷺ was in no condition, the weakness. So she said, I chewed it up, the end of it. Then he said, give it to me in my hand, and I gave it to him, and the Prophet ﷺ used it. And so she says, جَمَعَ رِيقِي وَرِيقَهُ جَمَعَ رِيقِي وَرِيقَهُ يَوْمَ تُوفِيَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عليه وسلم. Like my saliva mixed with his saliva on the day that he passed away. So she said he did the siwak, and then he was holding the siwak, doing the siwak, and then she said the Prophet ﷺ started to say, Allahumma al-rafiq al-a'la, Allahumma al-rafiq al-a'la, Allahumma al-rafiq al-a'la, fir rafiq al-a'la. He kept saying this over and over again, which means, oh Allah, it's time to be with the greatest of friends, with the highest of company, with the most exalted of places, company. He was talking about Allah. It's time to be with you, oh Allah. It's time to be with you. She said, he said this multiple times. And she said that I felt, because he was leaning on me, I felt like a deep exhale, like really deep, coming out of him because he was leaning on me. So I felt it on my body, him exhale very deeply. He breathed out really hard. And she said a little bit of, like sometimes you breathe really hard, a little spittle kind of comes out. So she says a little bit of like his saliva, like spittle came out. And she said it landed on my skin. And it was so cold, it sent like these shivers through my body. And she said after that, he was holding the siwak in his hand, and he lowered his hand. And she said, I thought maybe he's reaching down for the water. The bowl of water was next to him. I thought he was reaching down to get some water. But she said, when I looked down, the bowl was sitting there, his hand was lying there outside the bowl, and the siwak had fallen out of his hand. And she said, I knew in that moment that the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. She said, when that last breath left his body, she said, the fragrance I smelled on that day, I have never smelled anything so fragrant before in my life. The soul of the Prophet. After he passed away, while his body was there, Salama radiallahu ta'ala anha, she said, I came and I touched the chest of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She said, months went by, wudu, ghusl, washing hands, cooking food. Months went by and I could still smell the fragrance on my hand. Years later, some Sahaba say that we went to go visit Aisha, al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. And we asked her about the passing of the Prophet ﷺ. She said, wait. She went inside the home and she came out with 2 garments. And she said, this is what the Prophet ﷺ was wearing when he passed away. And she said, when she brought it into the room, the whole room became fragrant. But she said, in that moment, I realized that the Prophet ﷺ had passed. She said, I sat there for a moment holding him. And then I called to my brother, Abdurrahman, come in, help me. She said he came and he helped kind of like lie him down. I got out from behind him. We lied him down, closed his eyes, took a sheet and covered his body. And then I told my brother Abdurrahman, go tell people that the Prophet ﷺ has passed. She said that he went and he announced, Umar and Mughira bin Shu'bah were right outside the home. They said, can we come in? I said, yes. They came in. They looked at the body of the Prophet ﷺ covered with the sheet. And Umar saw it and he said, the Prophet ﷺ is not dead. The Prophet ﷺ is not dead. He's gone to talk to his Lord. He will be back soon. He's not dead. Mughira bin Shu'bah went to him and he said, Umar, he grabbed him by the shoulder. Mughira was a tough guy as well, so he wasn't afraid. He grabbed Umar by the shoulder and he said, Umar, he has passed. And he said, you liar, he has not passed. Get off. Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, was sitting outside. When they told him, Abbas was a tall man, almost 7 feet tall. He had a very loud, booming voice. the Prophet ﷺ used to use him to tell him to make announcements for him. When he found out the Prophet ﷺ passed, he started screaming, أَعِنْدَكُمْ عَهْدٌ? Does anyone know what we're supposed to do now? Tell me. He started like screaming. What are we supposed to do? Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he found out, he became catatonic. Just frozen. Like nothing. It actually, there's a story, someone said salam to him that day, and he didn't respond because he was frozen. Shocked, out of shock, he was just catatonic. They said salam to him and he didn't respond. That person later on, a few days later, said, "Are we okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, why wouldn't we be okay?" He said, "I said salam to you. You didn't respond to my salam." He said, "When?" He said, "The day the Prophet passed away." He says, "I don't even remember what happened that day. That just happened." Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he found out, he started crying like a child cries. And he went straight home to Fatima to comfort her. Everyone was just devastated. That morning, after Fajr, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu had gone to run an errand on the outskirts of Medina. After Fajr, he had gone to take care of something, on the outskirts of Medina. He entered back into Medina maybe half an hour after the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. The second he walked in and he saw the situation, he knew what had happened. He came straight home. He knocked on the door, told Aisha that it's me, your father. She said, "Come in." He went inside. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says he knelt down by the body of the Prophet ﷺ. He uncovered his face and he said, "Wa Khalila, oh my friend." And he kissed him on the forehead. He said, "Wa Nabiyya, wa Rasulah, my prophet, my messenger." Kissed him on the forehead. And he said, "Wa Habiba, my beloved." And he kissed him on the forehead. And he said, "Tibta hayyan wa tibta maytan." You were beautiful in life and you were beautiful in death. He then covered the face of the Prophet ﷺ. He comforted and consoled his daughter Aisha. And then he went out into the masjid. He went out into the masjid. He called Bilal. And he said, "Call the adhan. Call the adhan. It's an emergency. Call the adhan." Bilal radiallahu anhu called the adhan. And you know, like they talk about muscle memory? There's a spiritual memory. He called the adhan, and people, no matter what was, they just started walking towards the masjid. They hear the adhan, they just started walking. People kept gathering in the masjid. And once they had all gathered there together, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu ascended the minbar. He stood on the minbar. Umar radiallahu anhu, everyone sat down. He said, everyone sat down. Umar radiallahu anhu was pacing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, saying the Prophet, like talking to him, the Prophet is not dead. He's not dead. He's coming back. He's coming back. Just, that's like he just didn't know how to make sense of it. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu standing on the minbar, he said, "Ijlis ya Umar, ijlis, sit." Umar radiallahu anhu couldn't even hear what Abu Bakr was saying. He was just lost. Finally, some people said, "Should we grab him?" And he said, "No, da'ahu, leave him." And then Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu started his address by reciting a verse of the Quran. He said, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ. Muhammad is a messenger. قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. Many messengers came before him and they left. أَفَإِن مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ. If he dies or if he's killed, إِن قَلَبْتُمْ عَلَىٰ عَقَابِكُمْ. Are you going to turn away from the religion? وَمَن يَنْقَلِبْ عَلَىٰ عَقِبَيْهِ فَلَن يَضُرَّ اللَّهَ شَيْئًا. Anyone who turns on the religion, they don't harm God, they only harm themselves. وَسَيَجْزِي اللَّهُ الشَّاكِرِينَ. God will reward those who remain steadfast, even in the face of the greatest tragedy. Umar radiallahu anhu said, when Abu Bakr started reading this verse, he said, it broke my trance. I froze, I stopped, I started listening. And he said, I knew this ayah, but I felt like I was understanding it for the first time. And then Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu said some of the most powerful words any person of this ummah has ever said. He said, "Man kana ya'budu Muhammadan فإنه قد مات." If you used to worship Muhammad, then go home, because Muhammad is dead. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَمَنْ كَانَ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهُ حَيٌّ لَا يَمُوتُ. But if you've been worshiping God, Allah, this whole time, then stay, because you got work to do. Because Allah is ever living and He will never die. And that's how Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu handled everyone. It was the greatest tragedy that ever came upon this world. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, the day the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, أَضَاءَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. It's like he filled the world with light. He illuminated everything. وَيَوْمَ تُوفِيَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم أَظْلَمَ كُلُّ شَيْءٍ. The day the Prophet ﷺ passed away, it's like all the light got sucked out of the world. He said it was daytime, but it's like, it felt so dark that I felt like if I held my hand in front of my face, I couldn't see my own hand. So tragic. I feel like our hearts got ripped out that day. But Abu Bakr pulled everyone together. And I want you to notice something. This is going to be one of the last points I'm going to make, and then we'll conclude. Not even 24 hours ago, less than 24 hours ago, when the Prophet ﷺ told them, guys, I'm leaving, Abu Bakr started crying so severely that the Prophet ﷺ had to stop what he was saying and say, pull yourself together, man. Pull yourself together. And less than 24 hours later, when the Prophet ﷺ actually passes away, Abu Bakr stands up there and pulls everyone together. You understand? And that's the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. Those are the people that he prepared. Those are the people that he left to carry this message on forward. And we owe a huge debt of gratitude and a lot of admiration and respect for those people that lived through that epic tragedy, but still continued on with the deen, and we're sitting here today. So, lastly and finally, to conclude, there's two things I'd like to share. Number one is, talking about the passing of the Prophet ﷺ was a very, very emotional and difficult, heavy thing. And if it moves you, if it affects you, that's a good thing. Think about how many people cry while watching a movie. Watching a fictional character die. Think about it. But yet, has the thought of the Prophet ﷺ ever moved us? So it's a good thing. That's like tasting Iman, experiencing faith. To feel the loss and the pain of the Prophet ﷺ. Number two is, I hope that this evening, and again I want to thank, of course, obviously, Sheikh and the Masjid administration and all the organizers of the program, Masjid Al-Aman, but I want to thank everybody who came here tonight. To spend an evening, Friday night, where a person can be doing so many different things. Spending it in learning of the life of the Prophet ﷺ is an amazing thing. Let this be the first step of a lifelong journey of continuing to learn and study and benefit from, reflect upon the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Make it a goal, make it a mission, make it an objective. I talked about it earlier. And while there's lots of resources, the one resource I'll share with you very humbly is a resource we've been working on for a really, really, really long time. I started in 2011 doing extensive research, reading a dozen or so resources, the primary sources of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, putting together my own research to basically go through the life of the Prophet ﷺ systematically. The couple of intentions I had was, number one, was to not shy away from the extensiveness of it. I was not going to limit myself, that I gotta finish it in this much, or it can only be this long, or whatever. Secondly, I was gonna rely upon the primary sources. Thirdly, was try to always connect it to real life practical lessons. And alhamdulillah, we've had 193 sessions, and next week inshallah is our last one. On Tuesday inshallah is going to be our final one, and that will conclude that series. This whole series is available completely for free, open. You can access it, you can download it, you can share it, you can fortunately play it on double the speed like many of my friends do, and then make fun of me for it. They're like, why are you so slow in real life? And I'm like, you listen to it on double speed. I'm not slow in real life. But it's completely available to you. There's, right now at this moment, there's 2 ways that you can access it. If you go, or 3 ways. If you go into the podcast app, if you have an iPhone in the podcast app, or any other podcast app that you have on Android, and you search Qalam, Qalam, you'll find it in there. Number 2, if you have the Spotify app, you can find it in there as well. Just search Qalam and it'll pop up. The third way is you can go to the website. You can just simply go to qalampodcast.com, qalampodcast.com, and you'll find it there. Those are the 3 ways you can access it right now. Very easy on your phone. There's a 4th way, inshallah, to access it that is coming in about 10 days. All right? Alhamdulillah, I'm not supposed to be announcing it, but whatever, it's 11 o'clock, so might as well. So we've been working on an app, alhamdulillah, so a free app, open for everybody, but it just, I don't know if anybody listens to a lot of podcasts and things like that. The iTunes, the Apple Podcast app is an abomination, all right? It's the bane of my existence. And it's just very difficult to organize things in there. So, alhamdulillah, we've built an app. We're just putting the finishing touches on it. So we'll be releasing it on the 1st of Ramadan, inshallah. If you follow Qalam, if you're on our email list, if you're not, just go to qalam.institute. You can sign up for our email list. Or if you follow us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, you'll see an update. On the 1st of Ramadan, we'll be releasing it and sharing it with everyone, inshallah. It'll be called Qalam Cast, but it'll be a free app, but it organizes the series very, very well. Very, very well. So inshallah, that's coming soon. But that's a resource that we've put out there. And we hope that that's beneficial to you. So take a look, inshallah, and hopefully that's something you can benefit from. But yeah, the main thing is just keep studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Lastly and finally, of course, I'm not going to take too much of your time with this, but alhamdulillah, at Qalam, there's a lot of different things that we do, the least of which is not. The main thing that we do, that takes our most time, our most energy, all of it, is alhamdulillah, we started a project almost a decade ago, where we said there has to be a way to train our future scholars and imams and leaders here. I went to Pakistan 30 years ago to go study. We all know shuyukh who went to Al-Azhar or Medina or India or Morocco or wherever else decades ago, and we benefit from them today, right? But there's got to be a way to replicate that process here. And we just need more people, right? How many Mufti Kamanis and Sheikh Mikails are there to go around? Right? How many Sheikh Yasser Birjases and people like that do we have to share? Right? So there's got to be a way. And not to mention female scholarship. To have qualified women who are scholarly in the religion. Right? So there's got to be a solution to this. So almost a decade ago, we started a project called the Qalam Seminary. And alhamdulillah, today, we have a full 5-year program, 5-year curriculum with over 100 full-time students. And inshallah, our first batch from the full Alamiya scholar program is inshallah graduating on June the 1st, inshallah. It's a real big deal for us. Again, the graduation, the commencement is going to be broadcast on our website. So follow Al-Amaan online and you'll see some updates for that, inshallah. But if nothing else, just pray for us, inshallah. Pray for us that Allah accepts. Pray for these students, these graduates, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts them and utilizes them, and that they become a source of benefit for the community. That's the only announcement I really want to make on behalf of Qalam. Again, I appreciate everyone for coming out tonight. I know it's very late. It's very, very late. All right, she's just delirious at this point. All right, now she knows we're all looking, so look at this. So inshallah, I'm going to go ahead and end and conclude here. I really appreciate y'all's patience and attentiveness. Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Al-Nasr. Firstly, we want to thank you for coming out and taking the time away to help us learn a little bit more about the deen. And secondly, please, on behalf of the Masjid and everybody here, thank your family for allowing you to come here and us stealing you away. Okay, with that, we're concluding tonight. Jazakumullah khair again for coming out. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Al-'asr, innal insana lafi khusr. إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم.
No, it's amazing. No, it's amazing. No, it was amazing. I know it actually warms my heart. I miss my kids less. Mariam and Aisha were typically pretty chill. Mariam would always come up to me and just like crawl into my lap and so if I was doing anything. They were pretty chill. He just don't care. He doesn't care. You're so nice. Yeah, you're so much fun. Yeah. My girls are athletes. Mariam plays softball. Aisha plays soccer. Look at this. Yeah, go ahead.